Thanks, everybody. Are you all awake this morning? There's no response. It's dead, okay? I'm sorry you had to come in this morning to hear me talk. Today we're going to talk about this, the state of cybersecurity in our industry. But before that, you have to kind of understand how we got here. So let's do a little bit of a history lesson. Really, the internet for most of us started back mid-1990s. eBay came online, Amazon came online. We had SSL certificates, so now we can encrypt transactions. So that's kind of where the internet really started for business to make some sort of profit on the internet, okay? And then right about the same time, that's when bad guys decided they can make a profit on the internet too. So our organization started hiring people like us to defend our networks against those bad guys trying to come after us, all right? And we implemented this thing called defense in depth. And if you look at that diagram up there in the top right corner, this is what we told our bosses we were doing, okay? Lots of overlapping circles of network defense that all were coordinated and perfectly kept bad guys out of our networks. But what we really did was we implemented 3 tools, right? We all had a firewall, we all had an antivirus system, and we all had an intrusion detection system. And a number of best practices emerged back in 1990. The first one was vendor in depth, because everybody heard vendor in depth before? Okay, that is, you're never gonna buy a single vendor to do all of this stuff because we don't trust all those guys. So we're gonna have multiple vendors defending our enterprise. The second one is best of breed. If we're gonna buy an intrusion detection system, we're gonna bring all the vendors into the lab for 6 months that sell intrusion detection. We're gonna hit it over the hammer, hit that stuff with a hammer to see what the best one is, and we'll pick the very, very best one. And the third one that popped up in the early 90s was complexity is the enemy. The more complex we made it, the harder it was gonna be for us to ensure that our enterprises were protected. All right, and you know, back in the 90s, that worked pretty well, okay? The adversaries weren't that mature yet, so we kept most of the bad guys out early in this operation. But as the adversaries matured, that didn't really work out anymore, okay? Defense in depth didn't keep the bad guys out of your networks because it wasn't precise enough. We just sort of threw tools out into the network and hoped that the bad guys would run into them, and any adversary worth their salt would find it easy to bypass those systems, right? That all changed in about 2010. This guy, Eric Hutchins, he worked for Lockheed Martin, and he had a big security research team. They produced a paper called Cyber Kill Chains. How many people have heard of cyber kill chains before? Okay, most everybody, good, all right? This paper completely revolutionized the network defender community, both for network defenders and also for security vendors and how they sell products to you. So let me explain how this thing works. As adversaries attack their victims' networks, regardless of what tools they use and regardless what motivates them to do what they do, they all basically have to do about 6 things to be successful in their missions, right? They have to recon your network looking for weaknesses. They have to deliver some sort of code to an endpoint somewhere. That's your laptop, your server, your printer, wherever they can get a foothold. Then they have to compromise that endpoint. I call that establishing a beachhead. They haven't accomplished their mission yet, but now they are inside your network, and now they can roam freely. What they usually do after that is establish a command and control channel so they can download more tools that will help them in their mission. And finally, once they get all that done, they do these things called actions on the objective. And what that really is they move laterally in your network looking for the data they've come to steal or to destroy. Right? So let's talk about what some of those motivations are. So cyber espionage, obviously they're trying to steal intellectual property. Cybercrime for the early part, for the most part, was stealing credit card information. But today, ransomware has come out as being the #1 thing that most cyber criminals do. We have hacktivism, which is these hackers try to embarrass their targets because they don't agree with their political stance. And one of their common tools is doxing email messages. How many people know what doxing is? Okay, nobody. Let me explain. Okay, my favorite example is a thing that happened back in 2010. A company called HB Gary Federal. Their CEO was an U.S. Air Force counterintelligence person in the past. He was now in charge of this federal business that sold intelligence products to commercial businesses. He was trying to make a name for his brand new company, and he did some research on the internet, and he thought he knew who the leaders of the hacktivist group Anonymous was. Right? Well, if you know anything about hacktivism, there are no leaders. It's kind of a franchise, right? Anybody can say they're a member of whatever hacktivist group you want, but he didn't know that, and he told the press he knows who the leaders were, and he's going to out them at a big security conference coming up in a couple of months. Whoa, what do you think the hackers involved in Anonymous did when they heard that? They went roaring into that company, compromised everything, compromised their email server, copied every email message, and put it out on a web server for anybody to read. They even provided a search box so you can look up your name. I call that customer service. All right, and so that happened. That was such a drastic thing to HB Gary Federal that company went out of business about 4 or 5 months later, okay? So that's what doxing is. It is trying to embarrass your target so to prevent them from doing what they're doing. We have cyber warfare, and that is basically destroying critical infrastructure or causing your enemies to die. We got cyber mischief, which was kind of defacing your website. We don't see that too much anymore, but that's what it is. We now have lately cyber terrorism, where your employees or your citizens are scared to do things because of what might happen. And this last one, this is relatively new for the civilian world, propaganda dissemination that's been in the news for the last year or so with the Russians going after election apparatus. All of these things we call the cyber adversary playbook. This is all the actions and all the motivations that a playbook, that an adversary has when they're trying to execute their mission. So think about that. You're going to hear about adversary playbooks a lot going forward from this conference, right? All right, so fast forward to 2010. Here's Eric Hutchins and his research group. They come up with the idea of the cyber kill chain, meaning that adversaries, regardless of the motivation and tools they use, they all have to do about the 6 similar things. As the bad guys come against victims' networks, then that means that network defenders, all right, we can find them, we can fix them in place, we can track them, we can target them, we can engage them, and then assess how good we did, all right, at every location down the cyber kill chain. Whereas most network defenders at this point, we're just trying to stop them in 1, 2, or 3 places. Now we're trying to stop them at every location. And the interesting thing about this is, all right, the adversary has to be successful at every one of those gates. For us, the network defenders, we only have to be successful once at one of those stages. If we can stop them once, we can stop the entire campaign. All right, so how does this work? We know that as adversaries work their way through their victims' networks, they leave indicators of compromise in their wake. These are clues in our networks that they have been there, all right? So this is my formal definition of what an indicator of compromise is, but it really is those things we find when the adversary has been in our networks, right? So how do we find these things? Well, white hat researchers find them all the time because they're just good people, right? We have security organizations like Palo Alto Networks and others. They all have threat intel teams that look for this stuff so they can protect their customers better. And we have government intelligence organizations who do it all the time. And they do it by finding these new indicators of compromise by watching the adversary operate in cyberspace. We know that the adversary, when they attack new victims, they don't invent an attack for every new victim. That doesn't scale. So they recycle their attacks over and over and over again until the network defender community figures out how to stop them. So what does it mean to the network defender community is that we know most of what the adversaries are doing on any given day on the internet. Most. I'm saying 99%. If we somehow collectively could collect all that intelligence and get it out to everybody, we would know 99% of what the bad guys are doing. That 1% is when the bad guy innovates and finds something new that we haven't seen before. But 99%, that's pretty amazing, right? So what does that mean is that we can prevent most of the attacks that are out there today, if we can just get our act together, share the intelligence, and put those prevention controls in place. All right, so here's my formal definition of what threat prevention is, but what it really means is converting indicators of compromise into your prevention controls that you have deployed in your networks, all right? So thanks to Mr. Hutchin, all right, we've recognized that as adversaries attack our networks, the network defenders can put prevention controls at every phase of the attack lifecycle. Not just 1, not just 2, everywhere, and exponentially increase our chances of stopping the adversary. Find, fix, track, target, engage, and assess. We can do that almost automatically. So, and this completely disrupted the industry. It disrupted how security vendors sell you all products, and it also disrupted how you defend your enterprise. So that's the big takeaway here. The Lockheed Martin kill chain paper completely revolutionized how we think about network defense, okay, in our industry. So that's good. So now, that was 2010, it's now 2017. Problems have emerged with the cyber kill chain model, all right? It's still the fantastic model, and we should still pursue it, but we've created other problems for ourselves, and the first one is we now have way too many tools to manage. In the old days, in the 90s, we had 3 tools: firewall, intrusion detection, antivirus. But now we're trying to put tools at every phase of the cyber kill chain. Even small organizations have 20 security tools that they have to manage. Medium-sized organizations have about 60, and big organizations like big banks and big governments, they have well over 200 tools that they have to manage, right? And that is just, it's at the point that it's breaking your InfoSec staffs, because the dirty secret is your InfoSec staffs have not gotten any bigger since the 1990s. They are still the same size. Now they're not managing just 3 tools, now they're managing 20, 60, 200 tools, and they just can't be done anymore. And remember, we said a best practice was, let's keep the complexity out of our network. If you have 200 security tools in your network, just think how complex that is, right? And remember that the other best practice we had is all of those have to be from a different vendor, because we don't trust one vendor to do all that. That means your staffs have to have expertise on 200 tools, okay? It's almost impossible to do, and it's the reason we're not very good at this network defense stuff. The third one is we waste too much time with best-of-breed evaluations. Because you think about what you have to do to decide what the best, let's say, firewall is. Okay, you bring all those tools back into the lab. Your InfoSec staff, instead of preventing bad guys from their network, now they're in the lab trying to figure out what the best tool is. And that they do a 6-month evaluation. Sometimes they last even a year. Okay, and let's say they pick a tool that you don't already have, that you're going to replace the current tool that you have. So now after you've done that, you're going to spend the next 6 months to a year forklifting the old technology out of your network, forklifting the new technology in, all to get back to almost the exact same spot you were when you started the project 2 years ago, okay? That is not improving your infrastructure, that's just churn, okay? So it's way too much wasted time for your InfoSec staffs. And the last one is, it's too efficient crossing the last mile with intelligence. And what I mean by that is, the way we find new indicators of compromise is that we subscribe to intelligence services, sometimes in the open source, sometimes we get them from our government helpers, sometimes we pay for intelligence services. All right, but what that means is your staffs have to receive the intelligence, decide that it's important to your network, decide what to do about it, and then they have to do it. Most people, it takes them days, weeks, years to do that, if they do it at all, when the enemy is moving at the speed of the internet, attacking you every 10 seconds, right? That just doesn't work. So that's manually crossing the last mile. And what we really need to do is automate that whole process, all right? So that's the problem what we got from the Lockheed Martin kill chain paper. We still think it's the right model, but we have to do some things, all right, to fix it so we get rid of those 4 big problems. The big solution that has emerged from the security industry is the power of the platform. Now, Palo Alto Networks invented this idea back in 2013, but now all the firewall vendors have some version of this. And the idea is you put most of those tools, all right, those 20 tools, those 60 tools, those 200 tools, you put them into one box. All right? So your InfoSec staffs don't have to be masters of all that much technology. All right? So you have one box that does most of the work. All right? So here's the question for you: if we're going to find, fix, track, target, engage, and assess in one single box, what would that box have to do? What would that platform have to do? And I'm going to tell you, I think it has to do 4 things. All right? The first thing is it has to have complete visibility. Meaning that whatever technology you choose, whatever vendor you choose, it has to be everywhere in your network. It has to be behind your perimeter. It has to be in your data center. It has to be in your cloud, both with SaaS applications and with IaaS applications. And it has to be on all your mobile devices, your phones and your laptops, everywhere. If you're buying a vendor that doesn't have a solution for all of that, you should not buy that vendor, all right? So complete visibility for wherever it needs to go. The second thing it should do, a single platform for your InfoSec protection, is it has to reduce the attack surface. And what I mean by that is it should be very easy for you to make rules like this. The marketing department should not be able to get to the financial data of the company. The security engineers, all right, should not have access to the financial department. That should be easily understood rules where you can actually prevent things, reduce the number of attack surfaces you have in your organization. So you should be asking your vendors, how easy is it for me to do that with your technology? The third thing is, it should prevent all known attacks. Remember, the 99% that's out there. It should prevent all of those things in multiple locations down the kill chain. If you're buying a vendor that can't do that, you're wasting your time and your money. And the final thing that it has to be able to do is detect unknown threats quickly and turn them into known threats and get that distributed to all your security stuff in your network in minutes, not in days, weeks, months, or years, right? So that is what a platform should do. If you get that done in one box, here's the benefit. Right? It's automatically integrated, meaning all those tools that you have down the kill chain, they're now talking to each other and sharing intelligence back and forth on what the adversary is doing. It's automatically orchestrated for you so you don't have to do anything, meaning that I'm going to deploy this on this particular tool and I don't have to do this over here. It's automatically making those decisions for you. Okay, it's automatically crossing the last mile with intelligence. Your security vendor is finding bad things quickly, turning them into known things, and deploying them to your security tools automatically so your teams don't have to do that, right? That exponentially increases how well you are protected against your against adversaries, especially if you're trying to do that manually, all right? It causes less wasted time, it reduces the complexity in your network, and here's the one that always stops everybody. Boom. Single vendor, okay? And this is really hard for people like us to get our hands around. We've been thinking that single vendor is the thing we should not be doing for the last 25 years in our industry. So all of us are going, there is no way I'm going to let a single vendor do most of this stuff. But I'm here to tell you that single vendor is not the right best practice anymore. It is the best practice that got us into the situation we are in right now. So remember, these are the three best practices that emerged in the 1990s. Vendor in depth, best of breed, complexity is bad. I'm telling you that vendor in depth is now not a best practice, and either is best of breed. The new best practice that we all should be passing is seek vendors who integrate for you. Okay, who integrate with all the tools that you want on your network, the ones you buy from the platform, and the ones that are not in the platform. Make sure you are buying a vendor who integrates with all those other security tools that you want, and that is the way you're going to reach nirvana here. Okay, and one more emerging solution on automatic orchestration. Okay, this idea came up in 2015 as a kind of an add-on to the prevention platform, meaning how do you orchestrate all the tools with the platform with all the other tools that you have, both security and IT? How do you get all that done? Well, I'll give you an example of how the security vendor community is trying to solve this problem. It's called a new company called the Cyber Threat Alliance. How many people have heard of this before? Raise your hand. Oh, okay, this is the first time, so this is a virgin audience. I love it, all right? All right, so here's the idea. We put these security vendors, these are all big-time security vendors who founded this company called the Cyber Threat Alliance. It is now a nonprofit company run by the guy on the far left over there, Michael Daniel. Michael Daniel was President Obama's former cyber czar, and the idea of this group is to form an information sharing organization between security vendors, okay, who will automatically send changes to every known adversary playbook in existence, okay, in real time, and the customers of our networks don't have to do anything. We are doing that just because it is the right thing to do. So we have Checkpoint, Cisco, Fortinet, Intel Security, us, Palo Alto Networks, and Symantec as the board members. These are all the CEOs and high-level executive vice presidents in all of those companies, right? We have about 12 members in the alliance now. These are people, these are all security organizations that are contributing to the playbook sharing idea. And notice that all of those, this is an international organization. There's 11 passes in Spain, Insights is in Canada, I think, I forget now. SK InfoSec is in South Korea. This is an international group sharing threat intelligence between security vendors so you all don't have to do that work. All right, so here's the ask to you. All right, this is something that is worthy to be done. So when security vendors come in and talk to you, be polite, listen to what they have to say, even buy their product, but then ask them, why aren't they a member of the Cyber Threat Alliance? Okay, and then point them to me. all right, because they absolutely need to be in there. And if you are doing an RFP this year on some new security tool, make the security vendors answer it in writing. Why aren't they a member of the Cyber Threat Alliance? Because what we really want is to have all the vendors in the alliance sharing threat intelligence together so we can make all of your networks more secure, all right? All right, and here's the last one, okay? I talk about automatic orchestration. If you think about what a firewall does, okay, and now firewalls today, they're not even really firewalls. They're now security platforms that do lots of things, thousands of things, okay, that we could spend the next 8 hours talking about all of them. But if you abstract it up to the very highest level so you can explain it to a CEO, okay, all right, they really do about 3 things. They collect intelligence on your network, they process that intelligence looking for bad guys, and if they find a bad guy, they stop the bad guy from executing. It does those 3 things. So what we've been doing at Palo Alto Networks for the past 5 years is moving the processing piece, all right, and the intelligence collection piece up to the cloud. Because essentially, we have infinite storage and infinite processing capability in the cloud where we would not be able to put that into our firewalls. We still enforce everything at the firewall. So what we do then is we put applications on top of the data, any kind of new idea that you'd want. Now we have our sandbox in the cloud is up there. We have behavioral analytics. We have an intelligence analytics engine, all sitting on the cloud data. And when those things find bad guys, we can send the enforcement decisions down to the firewall. We've been doing that for the past 5 years. It's a really successful model. The next evolutionary step in this is what we announced in June, is we're opening that up to third parties. Meaning, we're going to have our own competitors write applications for our cloud's data that you can use in your network, okay? So think about the implications for that. It solves 2 huge problems. First one is, how does a startup company that has a really great idea get their product to market and become successful? At last RSA's conference in San Francisco, there were some 700 security vendors on the floor displaying their wares. And all of them, I talked to many of them, they all say they have the product that's going to solve all your security problems. Every single one of them has the solution. And even if that was true, in order for them to be successful, they have to convince venture capitalists to give them money. They have to hire a sales force. They have to hire a marketing department. They have to build a box to put their new cool idea in. And they have to convince people like us to buy their box and put it everywhere in our network. Right? That is the reason that most of those 700 vendors aren't going to be around in a couple of years, because it's really hard to do that. With this new App Store idea, they can write their algorithm, put it in the App Store, the security App Store, and all of you get to try it by just downloading it to your firewall as easily it is downloading the next Angry Birds game from your iPhone. Okay? So that's how it can get done. So now it helps those vendors get their product to market. The second thing it solves, though, is the other problem I was talking about, complexity. It's really hard for all of you to deploy new security tools because it takes time to evaluate them, it takes time to deploy them. Now it's going to be simple for you to deploy any kind of tool. In fact, you can deploy 3 kinds of behavioral analytics engines. You can download the Palo Alto Networks one and one competitor 2, one competitor 3, see which one works better, say I want number 3, pay for that one, get rid of the other 2. It'll be so easy to consume cybersecurity products in the next couple of years, all right, that it's going to completely disrupt how we all consume security products in the future, all right? So that's coming down the road. You'll probably see the first apps for that in the next year or 2, okay? All right, I'm at the end, but I do have homework for all of you. You don't think this was easy, do you? You have to actually study after you leave this room. All right, and the first one is, I need you to answer the question in all your RFPs about the Cyber Threat Alliance. That will make the entire community safer, and it'll be easier for you to automatically cross the last mile with intelligence. Second, you should have read the Lockheed Martin kill chain paper by now. Look it up. It's easy to find. It's only 10 pages. It's easy to read, not that technical, and it really did change the direction of our industry, so you should have actually read the paper by now, okay? And in the next 6 months, there's a couple things I'd like you to consider. Jettison the 1990s best practice of best of breed and vendor in depth. Okay, you need to adopt this new best practice of automatic orchestration in your own industries, okay? And then finally, this is the most important one. Seek vendors who integrate their products for you so your staffs don't have to do that themselves. All right, and I'm at the end. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you around the conference.